Coming out of Lake Travis High School in Austin, Texas, Garrett Wilson was one of the most highly recruited players in the nation. He was the second rated wide receiver in his class, 5th in the state of Texas, and 29th nationally. He ended up committing to the Ohio State Buckeyes, where he had a great career and eventually was a top 10 pick. But what if he decided to commit to Ohio State's biggest rival, the Michigan Wolverines? Today, I'll show you what would happen if Garrett Wilson attended and played for the team up north. With Garrett Wilson committing to the Wolverines, they would now have 2 5-star wide receivers on their roster, Garrett Wilson and Donovan Peoples-Jones. This would cause Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan coaching staff to switch to a pass-first offense. Having 2 5-star receivers and running the ball every down wouldn't be a good allocation of your resources. So at the start of 2019, Michigan became a high-flying passing attack in the Big Ten. Garrett Wilson started off his college career at Michigan, going up against Central Michigan, and his debut was pretty impressive, especially for a true freshman. 5 catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown. The Wolverines absolutely dominated Central Michigan, winning 51-10. The first game was way too easy, but next week, the Wolverines play against Notre Dame, who's ranked in the top 10. Michigan is ranked number 5, while Notre Dame is ranked 7. The Michigan coaching staff is expecting Garrett Wilson to play in the slot for the majority of his freshman season because of his twitchiness and his short area explosiveness. Against Notre Dame, Wilson didn't have the biggest impact, but he had 3 catches for 36 yards. I know he's still happy with the result because Michigan ended up winning by 2 touchdowns, 38-24. After this win, Michigan faces another cupcake, Akron, and I know they wanted to do them dirty because they play in the state of Ohio. The number 3 team in the nation versus an unranked team. This should be a butt whooping. In a short sample size, Garrett Wilson flashed his potential, having 3 catches for 54 yards in the game. Michigan won the game 41-14, and the game was never in doubt. Michigan would face steeper competition. Big Ten play is underway, and they play against the Maryland Terrapins in Maryland. Even though the Terps are a Big Ten team, Michigan had no resistance going up against them. Garrett Wilson had minimal impact in this game, only catching 2 passes for 35 yards. But the Wolverines still got the job done, winning 37-8 in College Park. Next week, Garrett Wilson and the Wolverines go back to Ann Arbor, where they face against the Minnesota Golden Gophers. And 3 quarters into this game was extremely competitive, and you didn't know who was going to win. But Garrett Wilson, once again, didn't really make much of an impact in the game, catching 4 passes for 25 yards. But he can't really complain though. He's a true freshman. Michigan is 5-0. And they rank 2nd in the nation. But next week, the Wolverines face another ranked team in the Penn State Nittany Lions. And Penn State's defensive backs are always a challenge for any wide receiving core in the Big Ten. But on this play, Garrett Wilson had his first highlight play of his career, just mossing the safety in the middle of the field. He finished the game with 5 catches for 61 yards. Decent game, but we're still waiting for his first 100-yard game. Michigan dominated Penn State 35-7, and now they're on to the next week, where they face the Indiana Hoosiers, and Garrett Wilson shows why he was ranked a 5-star. Made one man miss and outran the entire defense on his way to the end zone. And Garrett Wilson finished with his first 100-yard game in his young college football career. 5 catches, 115 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Michigan wins the game 38-22, and they are now 7-0, facing their rival Michigan State next week, who's also ranked in the top 10. The Wolverines have to go to East Lansing to play against Michigan State. Garrett Wilson scored the first touchdown of the game, but that's pretty much all he did. 3 catches for 39 yards and 1 touchdown. And the Wolverines defense collapsed, losing 48-35. Such an embarrassing loss, especially coming at the hands of your rival. Michigan would drop down to number 5 in the rankings and try to bounce back against Nebraska the following week. Garrett Wilson flashed his ability once again, finishing the game with 4 catches, 59 receiving yards, and no touchdown. But Michigan lost again. That's back-to-back losses for the Wolverines. Starting off the season 7-0 and then dropping 2 losses to 2 ranked teams is not a pleasant feeling. And just like that, Michigan's contention for a national championship is over. But Garrett Wilson can still show out individually this season. After 2 ugly losses, Michigan is on the road in Evanston, Illinois to play against the Northwestern Wildcats. And in this game, Garrett Wilson showed off. Highlight play after highlight play after highlight play. Up by 2 touchdowns in the 4th quarter, he makes this great catch and walks into the end zone untouched. This was by far the best game of his career. 5 catches, 163 receiving yards with 2 touchdowns. Michigan bounced back with a win 45-29, but they won by 16 points against a Northwestern team that's 3-7. Even though they're out of the national championship picture, they still have a chance to win the Big Ten, so they need to play better if they want to have a chance of winning the Big Ten. Next week, Michigan went to Iowa City, Iowa to play the Iowa Hawkeyes, where they blew out Iowa Iowa 49-14. And that was extremely impressive considering the defensive product that Iowa consistently puts on the football field. Garrett Wilson finished the game with 4 catches for 50 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Now, what we've all been waiting for, the game, Ohio State versus Michigan, is finally here. 7-7 early in the first quarter. Garrett Wilson makes a huge play, mossing the safety. He started off the game on fire against the #1 team in the nation. And in the third quarter, he had to remind Ohio State why he was a 5-star, making guys miss in the open field, showing off his athleticism play after play. For his first time playing against Ohio State, he didn't have a bad game. 3 catches for 66 yards. And Ohio State gets upset by the Michigan Wolverines, 35-30. Garrett Wilson starts off his career at Michigan 1-0 over Ohio State. That was Michigan's last game of the regular season. They would play in the New Year's Six Bowl against the Oklahoma Sooners, where Garrett Wilson flashed his 5-star potential time after time in this game, mossing Brendan Riley Howes on this play, finishing the game with 4 catches and 57 receiving yards. Michigan finishes the 2019 season 11-2, winning 45-21 over the Oklahoma Sooners. And Garrett Wilson finishes his true freshman season with 50 catches and 837 receiving yards. Not bad for not being the #1 receiving option. 2020, Garrett Wilson and the Michigan Wolverines have higher expectations. Wilson choosing the Wolverines over Ohio State has a butterfly effect. For some reason, the pandemic never happened, so the Big Ten played a full schedule in 2020. Garrett Wilson started off his sophomore season with an 86-yard touchdown reception against Utah. Michigan doesn't have elite wide receiver talent this year, so they will be force-feeding Garrett Wilson the ball. And he was so dominant this year. 12 catches for 303 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. Individually, this was easily the greatest game of Garrett Wilson's career. But Michigan, as the #3 ranked team in the country, should not be giving up 42 points on defense. Luckily, Michigan plays a cupcake the following week, Miami of Ohio, where they beat them 28-21. But once again, it was a struggle win for the Wolverines. Garrett Wilson individually did his thing once again, 9 catches for 179 receiving yards. Garrett Wilson is clearly starting to emerge as the best wide receiver in college football. The following week, Michigan travels to South Bend to play against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, where Garrett Wilson makes another big play for another big touchdown. He had another big game, 7 catches for 148 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown. So much for the struggle wins that the media was talking about all week, because Michigan dominated, beating Notre Dame 34-17. After the close win against Miami of Ohio, and then Michigan dominating Notre Dame and being ranked #1 in the nation, everybody figured that they would just roll through Arizona State. Garrett Wilson rolled through them with 8 catches, 119 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns, but they struggled mightily, only beating them 42-37. Late in the fourth quarter against Indiana, both teams are 4-0. They needed to rely on Garrett Wilson late in this ball game to come through. They fed him the rock late in the game, and he delivered once again. And I think at this point, everyone realized that Garrett Wilson was the #1 receiver in the nation. 6 catches, 158 receiving yards, winning the game 35-27. Michigan is 5-0 now, but everyone is chalking them up to be 6-0 because they play against a 1-5 Wisconsin team the following week, where they're in a struggle late in the third quarter, down by 17 points. The only way that they'll get back into this game is if they force feed the ball to Garrett Wilson. Down by 3 with 2 minutes left to go in the ball game. The only logical decision to make is to get the ball to number 5. They threw it to him right here. He broke a tackle and would walk into the end zone, giving Michigan the lead. Finishing the game with 11 catches for 197 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns, all while completing an almost insurmountable comeback to the Wisconsin Badgers, winning 45-38. Michigan is now 6-0, playing up against an unranked Nebraska team where they were just expected to handle business. And Garrett Wilson put on a Heisman performance, 13 catches for 253 receiving yards. He led Michigan to a win over Nebraska 42-14. And now it's time for Michigan to get revenge on their rival, who they lost to last season. The Michigan State Wolverines, coming into this game 7-0, expected to have full control of this game over a team that's 3-5, the Michigan State Wolverines. Garrett Wilson finished the game with 7 catches for 81 yards. Not a bad game, but not what we expect consistently from Garrett Wilson. Michigan won the game 31-17 over Michigan State, so I guess that's what really counts. The Wolverines are now 8-0. playing up against 2-6 Minnesota this week. On 3rd down and 20 in the first quarter, Garrett Wilson almost takes a slant to the house. Soon as he caught the ball, I thought he was going to hit his head on the goalpost, but some reason the DBs ended up catching up with him. He got 73 yards on the play though. Michigan won the game 42-10, absolutely dominated Minnesota, and now they're 9-0. The following week, they're back in Ann Arbor where it's snowing and they're struggling with Northwestern, who's not a bad team. One of the best defenses in the nation, and they have some great DBs. But it wasn't enough to slow down the nation's best wide receiver. 11 catches for 181 yards for Garrett Wilson. Michigan ends up winning the game 31-14, and they move on. Being 10-0 this late in the season is an accomplishment in itself. The penultimate game for the regular season is against the Iowa Hawkeyes, and Garrett Wilson loves showing off his incredible stop-start ability against them. He finished the game with 9 catches, 113 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. But Michigan definitely struggled, only winning the game 44-38 against a team that's 5-6. This is a classic look-ahead game before the Ohio State game, and this Ohio State-Michigan game is the biggest game of the year. Number 2 versus number 3. In the first quarter, Ohio State will be up 7-0, and Garrett Wilson ran a nasty route and messed up the safety in the middle of the field. But it wouldn't translate to points. Michigan would be down 21-0. They need to dig themselves out of this hole if they want a chance to win this ball game. And right on cue, Garrett Wilson makes a big play and puts himself deep in the Buckeye territory. But it wouldn't be enough. Even though Garrett Wilson finished with 7 catches and 92 receiving yards, the Buckeyes dominated Michigan, winning 42-14. And Ohio State will be going to the Big Ten championship game. Garrett Wilson was injured in this game, so that would be the end of his season. And Michigan was left out of the playoff. And now we're here at the start of Garrett Wilson's junior season. Michigan starts the season ranked number 12, playing up against Oregon State. Garrett Wilson does what he normally does and dominates the football game, putting up 11 catches for 207 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Michigan loses their home opener 41-38 to Oregon State. Hopefully they can bounce back the following week versus a lowly UNLV team. Garrett Wilson once again showed Michigan and the entire nation why he's the best receiver in the country, putting up 13 catches, 264 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Michigan got their first win of 2021, winning 37-21 over UNLV. The following week, Michigan would travel to Salt Lake City to face against the Utah Utes. Once again, Garrett Wilson showed everyone why he's worthy of being a top 10 pick. Back-to-back 200-yard receiving games, 12 catches, 227 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. But Michigan is getting way too comfortable playing these close games against inferior teams. They only won by 7 points. Following week, they would come back to Ann Arbor, playing up against the University of Minnesota, and Garrett Wilson once again went off. 10 catches, 130 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. But on the downside, Michigan ends up losing the game 42-38, and just like that, their national championship contention is pretty much over with. But Garrett Wilson still wants to win a Big Ten championship before he goes on to the NFL. The following week, Michigan would travel to West Lafayette, Indiana to play against the Purdue Boilermakers, and Wilson runs a beautiful post corner route to pretty much seal the game against Purdue. He finished the game with 13 catches, 168 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. Purdue got a couple of late garbage time scores to make the game closer than what it seemed like, but Michigan is back in the top 25, and they're over 500 once again. Following week, they're back in Ann Arbor playing up against BYU, but they're losing late in the ball game. And like I said earlier in the video, if you're in any kind of predicament, I would suggest force feeding the ball to number 5. And they did that. Garrett Wilson finished the game with 16 catches for 239 receiving yards. And Michigan won the game in the clutch 38-35 over BYU. The comeback win was nice and all, but playing against inferior teams like this is not impressive, especially since they play against the 9th-ranked team in the country the following week, the Penn State Nittany Lions. And in the third quarter, Garrett Wilson absolutely whoops Tariq Castro Fields on this out route. That was pretty much all the production he had in the game though. The Penn State DBs locked in on him and locked him down. But Cade McNamara decided that if Garrett Wilson wasn't going to eat, everybody else would. And Michigan dominated them, winning 52-14. And that was a huge win right before they play against their rival, the Michigan State Spartans, in East Lansing. With the score tied 21-21 in the third quarter, Garrett Wilson made a huge impactful play to put the Michigan Wolverines deep in the Spartan territory. Garrett Wilson finished the game with 11 catches and 234 receiving yards with 3 touchdowns. It seems like every other week this man is dropping 2 bills on the team. But Michigan State ended up winning. This game went into 3 overtime, 53-51. And Michigan's defense should be ashamed of themselves, giving up 53 points. And after that loss, Michigan would be unranked, sitting at 5-3. Hopefully they can bounce back the following week against Nebraska. Garrett Wilson once again goes off for 200 receiving yards, and at this point he's looking like the best player in college football. Michigan wins the game 48-0 over Nebraska. After giving up 53 points the last week, a shutout was the least that they could do. Michigan is now back in the top 25 as they travel to Evanston, Illinois to play against the Northwestern Wildcats. And Wilson once again shows how valuable of a player he is to his team. He is the passing attack. 14 catches, 278 receiving yards with 3 touchdowns. Michigan also won the game 55-21, now at 7-3 with 2 more games left to go on the season. Wilson missed the Maryland game with an undisclosed injury, but he wouldn't miss the Ohio State game if his life depended on it. Down 14-3 to start the game off. Michigan would rally back and the score would be tied 28-28 in the fourth quarter. Garrett Wilson made the biggest play of his college football career, a game-winning receiving touchdown against their biggest rival for 68 yards. He finished the game with 13 catches, 235 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. One of the all-time moments in this historic rivalry. Michigan wins the game 35-28 and they'll be going to the Big Ten championship. Garrett Wilson still has his opportunity to win a Big Ten championship before he goes on to the NFL. But it won't be easy playing an elite secondary from the Illinois Fighting Illini. Up 17-0 in the Big Ten championship game, Garrett Wilson will be covered by Devin Witherspoon and make an acrobatic catch. Witherspoon really just missed time the interception. Garrett Wilson finished the game with 10 catches, 154 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. And Michigan won the Big Ten championship 44-41 over the Illinois Fighting Illini, finishing the season 10-3 with a chance to finish 11-3 in a bowl game. Wilson finished the season with a Biletnikoff Award, which is given to the best wide receiver in college football, and pretty much solidified himself as a top 10 pick. He sat out the bowl game and declared for the NFL draft, leaving college football for the single season record for receiving yards, 2,417 yards.
The New York Jets select Garrett Wilson, wide receiver, Michigan.
Garrett Wilson went on to be drafted by the New York Jets with the 10th pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, proceeding to win Offensive Rookie of the Year with over 1,100 receiving yards.